Yeah. Okay.
Yay.
All right. Okay, let's walk through some resolutions because there's some great stuff coming up. Let's drag that over here. Now, can you all see the screen? Anyone have any?
Yes.
You got it? Okay, good. So first one, 23-01. This is a resolution that, if adopted, would put the Synod in support of the Afghan Adjustment Act. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. There's a great deal of information, valuable information in the whereas clauses that I do encourage you to read. But the gist of it is we worked with many people in Afghanistan, and when we pulled out, we as a country pulled out of Afghanistan, there were a lot of evacuees that came here. The Afghan Adjustment Act would provide those people with a path to citizenship. They do not currently have one. The Afghan Adjustment Act, there were actually a couple of bills proposed in the previous Congress. They died when the Congress switched over. So they would need to be reestablished in the current Congress. And this resolution would put the Synod, have the Synod encourage the powers in Congress to establish the act, reintroduce it, and move it through the process of becoming law. Are there any questions on this resolution or anything you would like to discuss about it? Okay. In that case, if questions do come up, please let me know. We can go back. What I would like to do is sort of have us move along and look at each of these, and this can be a free-flowing discussion of the various resolutions if we have any questions come up, things we want to consider. This, by the way, is a good time to talk about some of those questions and begin those conversations, especially because we are not currently bound by the rules of debate, which makes it a lot easier to ask informal questions. So, second one, 23-02 is private immigration detention centers and advocating for the Synod to ask for an end to private immigration detention centers. These are currently, when somebody is detained coming across the border, they are often put into a detention center, many of which are privately owned. You may have heard about them in the news. They've been quite controversial. So this resolution would position the Synod in opposition to the privately owned detention centers and ask for an end to those. Are there any questions about this one? Okay. And again, many of these resolutions have a great deal of information in the whereas clauses. The whereas clauses are not something we can actually debate when we get into debate at the assembly, but I do encourage you to read them now because for the background information they contain. 2303 is kind of an interesting one. So previously we had a resolution on private immigration detention centers. This is a memorial regarding private immigration detention centers. So the resolution is a document that speaks to the Synod as a whole, to us. The memorial is a document that goes to churchwide and asks them to consider taking action. Under the ELCA's rules, we have to have two different documents. The resolution has to be separate from the memorial, so we will be considering them at the assembly separately. There'll be some discussion of the resolution, then there'll be discussion of the memorial. We'll debate on them separately and vote on them separately. So this memorial goes to churchwide and asks churchwide to take a position on these private immigration detention centers. Okay, any questions on this one?
Can I add, Jeff, just a comment?
Yeah, please.
All three of these were developed in consultation with Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, who are working on these issues nationally. Once we developed these motions, they asked if it was all right if we allowed them to share this with other synods, these three motions, which they did. And as I understand it now, there are 5 other synods who have decided to use these as templates of sorts to consider the same kind of actions. So in some ways, it's natural that if we're memorializing the ELCA, it actually may come from a bunch of synods if they all act in the same way.
That's interesting. I did not know that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Just a comment, Jeff.
Mhm.
I served on the Memorials Committee for the Churchwide Assembly a number of years ago, which is the organization that's the churchwide equivalent of this Resolutions Committee. And you're absolutely right, Bill, that when the Memorials Committee of the ELCA sees 5, 6, 7, or 8 separate synods addressing a similar issue, what they will do is coalesce the language of those. I mean, they'll leave the originals, but they'll coalesce that into a single. The more there are from separate synods, the more likely it is to come before the Churchwide Assembly with a significant voice. The Churchwide Assembly is never able to consider all of the memorials. Some are considered separately, and the more synods are invested, the more likely that is to be true. The rest of them are bulked together and just considered en bloc. So it does have an effect when there's 4, 5, 6, or 7 synods saying the same thing.
Okay. And I see a question or comment from iPhone 5.
Hi, Jeff, real quick question. And I think you went over this real quick, but I just need a little bit more. Whereas versus resolved. Whereas is essentially the background and what we can debate on, correct? Whereas resolved is this is what we are as a synod hoping to be resolved to do. Is that correct? Can you clarify that?
That's close. So whereas is absolutely the background. It sets the sort of, it conveys what's going on, conveys background information. Resolved is what we want to do. The only difference is that we can only debate the resolved, not the whereas. The synod's tradition is that the resolved clauses are debatable, the whereas clauses are not. So when we propose amendments or things like that on the floor, it will be amendments to the resolved clauses. Is that reasonably clear? Okay, got it. All right. Are there any other questions at this point, either on this or the previous ones or on the process? Okay, then. Moving on. 23-04 is our baseline salary resolution. We typically do one of these every year, and this sets the baseline salary for our pastors. And this year, based on cost of living increase, the current recommended baseline salary, you can see it all in here, all the information. So any questions or comments on the baseline salary? Okay, let's talk about 2305. Oh, I'm sorry, Pastor Jay.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute my computer unsuccessfully, but I think I got it now. Yeah, just a note about the baseline salary. If you look at saying we suggest a 7.3% increase in baseline salary, that might look like it's a really big number to some people. There's a worksheet for determining salary ranges for pastors which contains many, many factors, including the cost of housing in the area where the congregation is located, years of experience, prior useful experience, et cetera. There are many factors for somebody who is, for example, an experienced senior pastor in a larger congregation. The baseline salary might actually make up less than half of their salary range. And for ministers of word and sacrament, or deacons, as we sometimes call them, there is simply a salary range by experience and education level. All that this does is basically change the first numbers in the formulas. And I think that's confusing for people unless you've worked with those documents in the past. So this just changes one number in those formulas. Doesn't mean everybody would get all pastors would be recommended to get a 7.3% increase.
Okay, anything else? Okay, so let's go on to 23-05. All right, this one is a little different from some of the others. This particular resolution came in after the deadline. So basically what's going to happen with this one is at some point during the assembly, we will ask for a vote on whether to consider this resolution. And we will need a 2/3 vote in order to consider and debate on this resolution. Basically, it's a 2/3 vote that says we're going to add it to the set of resolutions we're going to consider. We've gone ahead and numbered it for convenience so that we can refer to it. But unlike the others that are already sort of on the agenda, we will need to vote if we want to add this one to the agenda. Now, that said, I think it's an excellent resolution, as pretty much all resolutions are. So I do think that I would encourage you to take a look at it and prayerfully consider whether we should add it to the agenda. What it does is increase the parental leave guidelines. So right now, parental leave guidelines are in the Pacifica Synod are very short. The guidelines are 4 weeks minimum, 6 weeks recommended. So if you are a pastor and you have a child, the current guidelines would have a minimum of 4 weeks to be back on the job. This resolution asks the Synod, well, it extends the leave to 12 weeks, the recommendation to 12 weeks, which is probably more in keeping with current guidelines for somebody coming back on the job. And as you can see, we have several folks who've signed up. We expect more signatures will be coming in. This is a preliminary copy of this resolution. Now, if we consider it, the way that it will work is we will have printouts available, and then we'll also, I expect to have it available on the web also for anyone who has their phone and can get to it that way. I do not think it's going to make it into the notebook. We've missed the notebook deadline. So I think it's going to be basically printouts at the table and pull it up on the phone kind of thing. Are there any questions about this one?
So when would it be the right procedure time to bring it up for that 2/3 vote? I'm asking for a friend.
Okay. Well, I happen to have a couple of folks on the call who have a great deal of experience, including one who's actually been through this kind of process before, and I'm going to give her a chance to answer that question.
Why, thank you, Jeff. And just a brief comment, Jeff, I've been helping, for those of you who, let me give a little background. I have been helping Pastor Amanda McClin perfect this resolution before returning it to the resolutions committee. Jeff, I'm noticing that the formatting of this resolution does not impeccably match the formatting of the other resolutions. I will be altering that and getting you a formatting perfected version of this as soon as this meeting closes. In answer to your question, Bishop Dave, for that friend of yours who has to make these decisions as the chair of the assembly, the timing in which this is brought before the assembly, I don't believe necessarily has to fall within the resolution's timeline. Most appropriately, at the first resolution's timeline on the minute-to-minute agenda, the first actionable item would be to have that vote, to have it brought onto the floor with a 2/3 majority. So the simplest answer is whatever that first bulk of time assigned for the resolutions committee, I would do this first to see
Great.
if it's going to come to the floor or not. Which then gives us and the parliamentarians some flexibility about how it will be brought before the assembly later in the agenda. At least we know one way or the other. If you, as the chair, feel it would be important to put that vote ahead of that first resolutions consideration, that is your privilege as the chair. So for instance, after the adoption of the standing rules or somewhere in that area, if you wanted to have that vote at that time, that is your privilege as the chair, if you would like to put it a little bit sooner. Does that answer
Great.
your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Okay. And yeah, and Laura, if you want to, we can talk. I know you've got a lot going on, so we can talk about how we're going to adjust the formatting and things like that.
It's just small things. I'm noticing that the whereases and the other resolutions aren't bolded. It's really simple things, and I already have it 90% done, so I'll send it to you shortly.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
I just wanted to let you know if it's to be posted to the website, to wait just a little bit until I get this in your hands.
I will indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments on this one?
Yeah, Jeff, just a really quick question again.
Mhm.
As a voting member who also happens to be visually impaired, and Pastor JP, I'm sorry I had my hand up longer than expected. I just wanted to get that. How soon will this be in print so that I can get it over to the e-reader so I can see it in Braille? Will it be in print? It doesn't take very long to get it in Braille. It only takes a few milliseconds. But when will this be in print, Pastor Laura or whoever wants to address this?
You know, I wonder what might be the simplest. It'll be within a day or two, but since you happen to be on this call and we can assist you directly, why don't we just have Jeff send it to you? The
Yeah.
language, what
That'd be
we're working
great.
on is a formatting change, not a language change. So let's get it to you as soon as possible so you can get that work done.
Yeah, can
Perfect.
you
Thank you.
get me your contact information, please?
I can email it to you because I have your email in a notebook. Yes.
Excellent, perfect.
We'll get it to you right away.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, and I see a Mora with a raised hand.
All right, I had to unmute myself. I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So I without having read all the whereases, the resolves, because I'm also having vision problems for today, but how does this work in conjunction with or in placement of church that has unemployment and state disability in place? Is this in lieu of for churches who don't generally have state disability and unemployment, or is this in work partnership with that process?
Would you like me to take that, Jeff?
Yeah, I think I know the answer, but you may.
Oh,
may
no,
have
no,
to
you
give
go
me more.
ahead. There's a lawyer in the room. You go first.
Oh, no. Well, okay, so my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this changes the guidelines. It does not impose anything. It changes the Synod's guidelines. But Pastor Laura, if you have additional information on this one, please do speak up.
No, that's precisely what I was going to say. I just probably would use more words than you would. It's the pastor thing in me. In answer to the question, you're definitely right on the second. It is in partnership with, not in place of or in lieu of. And as Jeff so well said, both the compensation guidelines as well as this, in terms of the number of weeks that would be allowed, these are recommendations from the Synod. So if you have other guidelines in your congregation, you are welcome and encouraged to use those as well. I think this is an effort on behalf of the author, who herself has navigated 4 weeks of maternity leave and recognizing the inadequacy of that. It's her effort to assist congregations in thinking a little bit more broadly about what would be more appropriate and to come nearer to the California standard, but it is indeed a recommendation. I did speak with my preschool directors about this, and they too have the disability leave that you were speaking of, and therefore their guidelines are different as well, and that is just fine. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. It gives me more information. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, anything else that we need to cut? Any other questions on this? Or comments or thoughts? Okay. In that case, those are all the resolutions that we have to cover. Are there any broader or more general questions that we need to discuss here? All right, then in that case, what I will do is give you back a few minutes of your day. You still have 20 minutes of morning left if you're in California, and a good bit more than that if you're in Hawaii. And I hope that you enjoy it. So thank you all very much. And I will see you all in about a week.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jeff. Terry asked me to remind us to stop recording.
I will do that now.
I imagine the Zoom itself might do that when we click out of it, but
Yep.
I wanted to pass